人不是很多。
Okay, Professor Wang, shall we start now?
Yes. Hi.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Talk at EEH. I'm Xie Zhiyu from Nanjing University. Now is the managing editor of a new journal called Eco-Environment&Health. So EEH is a new open access journal aiming to be one of the most important flagship journals in the fields of ecology, environmental science, and health. So I would like to take this chance to invite Professor Wang and our audience to contribute your valuable manuscripts to EEH. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Minhong Wang. He was my PhD supervisor actually. So Professor Minhong Wang is currently the Advice and Research Chair Professor of Environmental Science, the Education University of Hong Kong, and the Editor-in-Chief of Environmental Geochemistry and Health. He got his PhD degree in University of Durham, UK. In addition, he has been awarded 2 DSc degrees by University of Durham and the University of Strathclyde in 1992 and 2004, respectively, based on his publication. Actually, Professor Wang has a very long publication list. He has published over 800 SCI papers and 32 book chapters, edited 25 books and special issues of scientific journals. As I know, he recently is editing another book, right? And his H index is 106, and his total citation of his paper is more than 43,000. Yeah. So Professor Wang was also have a very long list of awards. He was awarded the Crouch Senior Fellows from Crouch Foundation of Hong Kong, and he was awarded the Royal Society Visiting Fellow from Royal Society of UK. He is the Emeritus Professor of Hong Kong Baptist University, where I got my PhD under the supervision of Professor Wang. And Professor Wang was also the Changjiang Chair Professor, Ministry of Education, China. And he got a silver medal of the International Interventions of Geneva. And he was elected as a member of the European Academy of Science and Arts this year. So according to the list of the world's top 2% scientists, 2021 and 2020, he is ranked number 6 out of 67,000 scientists of the world. So he is the top Chinese scientist on the environmental sciences globally, according to the citation impact. So now let's welcome Professor Wang to give his talk. Professor Wang,
okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yu. I'm very happy to see you because 4 years ago we met in Nanjing, and now we have to meet online. Now my talk will be focusing on the major contaminants in our food items. And I would stress the importance of sustainable management of toxic chemicals. So I will start using the share screen. Okay. Oops. Share screen.
Yes, I can see your screen now.
Okay, good, good. Now, the title is Sustainable Management of PTS to Enhance Environmental and Health Protection. I'm now an advisor of the Education University of Hong Kong. Now, within this 40 minutes, I will talk about pollution and human health and explain a little bit about PTS and the importance of food safety because of chemical food contaminants. Then I will use some case studies to explain some major contaminants. Now, I would not be able to go through all the toxic chemicals, so I will talk a bit more on arsenic, mercury, and persistent organic pollutants. If time is allowed, I will talk about plastics and microplastics, and more importantly, the associated chemicals with the plastics. I will then talk about chemicals management issues, and I will use a case study which I involved in the past 10 years or so on a project to explain about this necessity of scientific inputs for environmental and human health protection. Now, there are three pillars of sustainability. There would be social, environmental, and economic. And environmental sustainability is regarded as the most important out of the three. Now, I would draw your attention to a paper which is published in the Lancet Commission on Pollution and Health. According to the paper, pollution is the largest environmental cause of disease and premature death in the world today. And chemical pollution is a great and growing global problem. So it's a rather long article, but I would like you to go through it if you got some time. Here I have a diagram to show you in the world the number of deaths per 1 million people due to all forms of pollution in 2015. Now, when we talk about persistent toxic substances, I think they should include persistent organic pollutants. We call them POPs, DDT, PCB, dioxin, and so on. Toxic metalloid, arsenic is a metalloid, and other metals like cadmium, copper, mercury, lead, and zinc. And then there's another term called emerging chemicals of concern. All these chemicals, we have been using them for quite a while. And then more recently, we found out they're not so safe. So a typical example is flame retardant, PBDE. In certain countries, in EU and USA and Canada, there's a law about putting flame retardants in all the products like curtains, carpets, and so on. And then they found out these flame retardants, PBDE, because of the usage, are transferred to human beings, and they serve as endocrine disrupting agents. And there would be other chemicals like nanoparticles, PFOS, PFOA, PPCP, and so on. We call all these emerging chemicals of concern. Now, in the year 2000 and 2003, I was lucky enough to involve with this project, which is called Regionally Based Assessment of PTS. I served as the coordinator of Central and Northeast Asia at that time. So the major purpose of this particular project was trying to assess the status of PTS in the environment and also in human bodies, and try to find out the impacts, the health impacts of these toxic chemicals. Now, some of these PTS, they come from different sources, and because of different pathways, they will eventually, these toxic chemicals coming out from the air, pollutants, and also industrial outfalls, and then eventually they will enter into the food chain, ending up some of these toxic chemicals like pesticides, PCB, mercury, they would be bioaccumulated and biomagnified in the food chain. So it ends up all the top trophic levels organisms, they concentrate high concentrations of these toxic chemicals and impose human health impacts if these living organisms are eaten by human beings. Now, if you lived in urban centers, densely populated urban centers, in the sewage plants, there are all sorts of chemicals coming from different directions, different sources, agriculture, people flushing into the toilets, all these unused drugs, consumer products, the PCP we talk about, and even open burning, the ashes. Well, good example is electronic waste, open burning, and all the ashes, they will find their way entering into our sewerage treatment system. Now, bearing in mind these sewerage treatment systems, when they were designed, they were not supposed to treat toxic chemicals. They are used to break down organic matter into inorganic chemicals. So all these toxic chemicals, when they enter the sewerage treatment system, and there would be a very good chance when the sewage is used for irrigation, and if the sewage is discharged into waterways, the toxic chemicals will enter into our food chain. A few years ago, we had a project trying to look at the removal efficiency of these PTS by different types of sewage treatment works in Hong Kong. So we looked at the heavy metals, organic pollutants, and some emerging chemicals of concern, including bisphenol A, PFOA, PFOS, and even antibiotics, hormones, and so on. And cut the story short, the results indicated not all the chemicals are treated efficiently. And even some chemicals like PBDE, flame retardant, the congeners, when they come into the sewage treatment plant, compared with those discharging into the water, the congeners will become more toxic. So you can imagine that we have problems of these traditional sewage treatment plants in treating all these toxic chemicals. Now, eventually, about 10 years ago, people found out there are a lot of toxic chemicals. Average 200 industrial compounds and pollutants found in 10 newborn babies. There was a study carried out in 2 major laboratories. All these toxic chemicals included organochlorine pesticides like DDT, diadrin, chemicals used in a wide range of consumer products we talked about, including PBDE, flame retardant, and also chemical pollutants derived from waste and fossil fuel combustion, PAH, mercury, lead, and so on. Now, all these toxic chemicals, they will enter into our human bodies through different exposure pathways. So there will be inhalation, dermal contact, and then ingestion, including drinking water, consuming our food. Now, the WHO mentioned there are 3 key global safety concerns in terms of food safety: the microbiological hazards like Salmonella, E. coli, and so on. There would be chemical food contaminants, all these toxic chemicals in our food items, and then the GM food. So in my talk, I will concentrate on the chemical food contaminants. Now, when we talk about food contaminations, when we talk about toxicity and potency, very often they will be dependent on concentration and the types of food contaminants. Some chemicals would be more toxic and some would be less toxic. And in terms of effects, there would be short-term high dosage, may be fatal. And there would be long-term low dosage, which may cause cancers and histological damages after, say, 50, 60, or 70 years. Now, when we look at this food contamination, I think we should look at the geochemical cycles of this PTS and trying to find out the sources, fates, and human health effects. In terms of exposure pathways, I think this is a very good illustration about arsenic. Now, arsenic is a kind of geogenic source of pollution because arsenic, the problem happened in a number of countries, I think about 15 countries or regions in the world. Because of the geology, the arsenic is very high in their underground water. So a story, started in Bangladesh, I think. Bangladesh used to rely on the surface water as their drinking water. It's a country, a very poor country with a lot of pollution problem. And they found out the water was highly contaminated by all these pathogens in the water. So the WHO stepped in and tried to help them by digging deep well, extracting water, underground water. And they examined the microorganisms. They were free of any living organisms. Without knowing, the arsenic concentration was very high. So a few years later, they found out these people, after they have been drinking this underground water, they developed a kind of disease called arsenicosis. I'll show you the picture in the next slide. And then inhalation would be a pathway, thermal contact, and eating food. And fortunately, the seafood we eat, it's mainly dominated by organic arsenic, which is less toxic. And that's another story about people hanging chilies in some remote areas in China, the people burning coal in households and try to hang all these chilies on top of the stove. And then eventually, because of the arsenic is coated on the chilies, and then people who have been eating them for a few years, they develop arsenicosis. So this is a related project I involved with the UNU, United Nations University, and a university in South Korea, trying to look at the health effects of arsenic on local residents in several regions in Cambodia. And apparently, according to our results, arsenic, there was high arsenic concentration in the groundwater for drinking and for irrigation. And then eventually, we also found out the rice produced in the region, because using arsenic-laden irrigation water, the rice also contain very high concentration of arsenic. So this is a diagram to show the breakdown of arsenic intake through eating different items. So there would be total concentration, egg, meat, and so on. And we found out cereal, including rice, seems to contribute a major portion of arsenic entering into human bodies. Now, well, even in some food additives, adding to grow chicken and pig, they put a chemical called rosazone. Rosazone is a compound, arsenic compound. They try to control intestinal parasites and try to promote growth. And then eventually they found out it may become a potential problem. Now, in the past, arsenic is used for treating wood as a kind of pesticides, but it's highly toxic. I think nowadays we are not allowed to use any arsenic for this purpose. Now, even FAO issued a kind of warning only about 8-9 years ago, I think. The arsenic levels in rice seems to be a worldwide problem. Now, because rice is, paddy rice, we were talking about paddy rice, it's always submerged in water under waterlogged condition. The arsenic-3 and arsenic-5, which are more toxic, will become predominant. And then they will be taken up by rice and then deposit in the rice grains. Now, a review paper written by Zhu Yongguan in 2008 nicely reviewed the problem, telling us there seems to be a worldwide problem because of the arsenic concentration in certain regions of the world. And Zhu Yongguan led a panel, about 3 or 4 people, I think, and tried to set up the standard of arsenic concentration in rice, and it's now used as an international standard. Now, DDT, I use DDT as an example. Now, theoretically speaking, DDT was banned because of its toxic effects. I'm sure you know all about DDT, but in certain countries, they still allow to use DDT for vector control. For example, treating mosquitoes which transmit malaria, including China. China is allowed to use DDT for such a purpose. Another country would be Mexico, I think. Mexico, so we still, some of the regions, we still have high concentration of DDT in the background soil. And if you look at the DDT and DDE ratio, you can find out, you can estimate when the DDT was discharged. And DDT, as well as other organochlorine pesticides, because we don't use DDT that much, but we have to switch to other types of pesticides which are not under control. So these organochlorine pesticides, they are lipid soluble, and eventually they will enter into human bodies and affect our metabolism, and they serve as endocrine disruptors. And the pregnant women and fetus are especially vulnerable to to these pesticides. Now, PBDE, as I mentioned, used to be emerging chemicals of concern because of the adverse health effects. Now, PBDE is included in the control list of the Stockholm Convention on POPs. So telling us the once this was a emerging chemicals of concern, but now it's under control. So this slide shows the entry route of PBTE to human bodies, mainly because of oral route and indoor dust inhalation. Now, another project we involved is fish contamination and human health. The project started when we put out a question. Now, we in Hong Kong have a lot of mariculture zones. All these mariculture zones, these fish, marine fish, they are grown in cages, and then underneath the sediment, they would be full of organic matter because of the fecal materials and also unconsumed fish feeds. Would that impose a problem because of the speciation, mercury speciation, whereby inorganic mercury will transfer to organic mercury? Methyl mercury is highly toxic by sulfate reducing bacteria under the such high concentration of organic matter, and then without aeration. So we worked on that. We had a group project. I think we were the lead institution leading 2 institutes, one in Hong Kong and one in mainland for this 4 years project. And then at the same time, we try to look at the bioaccumulation and biomagnification of mercury in top carnivores, in sharks. There seems to be the case because of sharks, a top carnivore, the concentration of mercury, in particular methyl mercury, is very high in their body, including the shark fins we usually eat. In addition to environmental pollution, fish feeds seems to be the major sources of contamination in cultured fish. In Hong Kong, we use trash fish, all these small fish without much commercial value, and then compound feed contain fish meal, which is made of all these trash fish. And we found out they contain high concentration of toxic chemicals, including total mercury, methyl mercury in our region. Now, in addition, in other countries, they also found out the salmon feed in USA. They also contain PCB and dioxin and so on. A study we carried out some time ago looking at the health risk assessment of consumption of market fish. So these are some common freshwater fish and marine fish in Hong Kong. So we try to look at the EDI, ADI, compared with reference dosage, and we come up with a hazard quotient. I don't think I have time to explain these columns one by one. So we look at these 4 metals. We found out only mercury seems to be a problem metal, according to the hazard quotient well over 1. And we also collaborated with the Red Cross in Hong Kong. We tried to take the blood plasma of Hong Kong residents and try to look at the concentration of certain toxic chemicals, mercury, DDT, and PBDE in blood plasma. And we found out there was significant positive correlation between levels of these toxic chemicals in blood plasma of Hong Kong residents and in the market fish. We also worked with Dr. Clement Leung, who was the director of in vitro fertilization clinic. So he was able to collect all these human tissues for us to analyze. My PhD student then was Chen Nian, who was also a medical doctor. So she is now MD and PhD. And she found out all these toxic chemicals in adipose tissues of patients with uterine leiomyomas, a kind of tumors, very much related to seafood consumption. Now, back to Dr. Leung, who has been working on mercury and the subfertility problems in Hong Kong males. And he found out there seems to be two major factors affecting this subfertile male. Now, this subfertile male, they have problems in their sperm, either sperm counts, sperm volume, or sperm motility. And the hair concentration of mercury seems to be rather high of these subfertile males. And he narrowed down to two factors because in the survey, these subfertile males were asked to fill in a number of questions like, do you have hot bath? Do you drink alcohol? Do you smoke cigarette? Where do you live? And how often you drink water? And fish intake, how many times of fish you eat in a week? And how about the tooth amalgam? Now, in the old days, the tooth amalgam tend to contain high concentration of mercury. So he narrowed down these two problems. This subfertile male seems to eat quite a lot of fish and also maybe have tooth amalgams with high concentration of mercury. So mercury seems to be a problem affecting human beings, affecting our reproduction. And at the same time, mercury can be passed on to our second generation through gestation and also lactation, okay? So in Hong Kong, there was a group of medical doctors in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. They found out the increasing maternal fish consumption, mother who eat a lot of fish, and maternal age seems to be significantly correlated with the increased cord blood mercury level, well above the world average, 5.8 microgram per liter. Now, autism in children seems to be related to heavy metals, which are highly toxic to brain cells and other body systems. So affecting the normal brain function and communication skills and even IQ. And we also work with another medical doctor who is the director of child health development. And she found out all these autistic children coming into her clinic can be divided into two major groups. The inland autistic patients tend to have high concentration of lead and arsenic, perhaps due to heavy polluted environment, whereas the coastal population, the autistic patients from Guangdong, Shanghai, Hong Kong, seem to have high concentration of mercury and cadmium, perhaps due to high consumption of seafood. Now, in 2017, we also published a review on the environmental toxicants and autism. And according to the data we reviewed, in addition to mercury and lead, POPs like DDT, PBDEs, PCB, and some chemicals like phthalates and bisphenol A also contribute to the development of autism. So it's now recognized fish is the most common route of mercury exposure. And then the NATO mercury exposure is very much related to IQ, and we have social economic effects of these. We don't want a group of population with low IQ, and then that would cause a lot of social economic effects. Now, even in Hong Kong, we have a Center for Food Safety, and according to the Hong Kong Total Diet Study, the report on methyl mercury, there's a warning by the government. Dietary exposure to methyl mercury seems to be a health concern to 11% of women aged 20 to 49. So according to all these food items they analyze, they find now all these big fish like swordfish, tuna, and so on, they contain a rather high concentration of mercury and methyl mercury. Looking at the time, I don't think I will have time to talk about plastics. Well, I'll try a little bit. Now, plastics seems to be a hot topic recently. A lot of papers coming up, published because of plastics. So plastics affect chemicals and waste because we use POPs as additives, cause climate change because we burn a lot of fossil fuels, incineration of plastic waste, and affect international water because of widespread plastics pollution, affecting biodiversity, also end up with land degradation and food system. I don't think I can go through all of these. Now, there will be environmental impacts of plastics. The toxic chemicals associated with plastics, plasticizer would be a problem. About 10 years ago, we have problem in Taiwan. People add this phthalate plasticizer into the drinks. We call them clouding agents to make the drink looks cloudy, a bit pleasing color, but somehow we have health problems. Using cosmetics and then risk to human health. Okay, now I want to highlight the importance of international conventions. There are a few conventions related to toxic chemicals. The first one is Stockholm Convention on POPs, and then second one, Basel Convention, Rotterdam Convention, and then mercury. We have mercury, Minamata Convention on mercury. So this is a very good graph. The results published in Chemosphere by a group of Swedish scientists, and throughout the years, they try to look at the concentration of POPs in human milk, and then they found out there seems to be declining trends of DDT, PCB, PCDD, PC dioxin. But for PBDE, as I mentioned, it's only under control a few years ago. There was a steadily increasing trend. It doubled every 5 years. That's why it's under control now. So, we have a problem. We need to manage these toxic chemicals. Now, this is the project I took part a few years ago, and we tried to look at the emerging chemicals management issues in developing countries and also countries with economy in transition. And this is a summary table about the results. I think heavy metals seems to rank #1. Heavy metals still are very important in the world, especially the developing countries. All these toxic chemicals coming out from industrial pollution and also mine waste and smelting waste and so on. Okay, now new chemicals. We have new chemicals coming out constantly. I think we need to be very careful about these new chemicals. For better control in different countries, in different regions, in China, in Hong Kong, we have worked on the we produce some inventory of existing chemical substances and try to prioritize when it come out to control. This is a project I want to talk about, but I don't have time. This is a project I involved. Number one, there was fish kills at fish culture zones before we used EIA as a management tool. And then eventually, about 11 years later, I also took part in a project. Now we have very stringent control looking at dumping of sediment in certain regions near the Hong Kong airport. We have EIA and all these regulations. So this is the site I have involved. We use this as a important tool for environmental management. So we look at the exposure pathways to the toxic chemicals because of heavy metals coming out of this dredged sediment, whether they will enter into the food chain and then affect some sensitive receivers. Dolphins, we were concerned with the dolphins because dolphins are important in Hong Kong, and of course human health. So we did that. And then I serve as a consultant for this project. And throughout the exercise, dumping of sediment and covering of sediment, we look at the water quality, sediment characteristics, and also benthic organisms, and also human health and ecological health risk. And we also look at the benthic organisms, pelagic fish, through regular monitoring. We also did water toxicity tests, tissue whole organism, pollutant concentration, and regular monitoring effects on ecological and human health. So this would be my conclusion. Wait for 2 minutes. Number one, I think long-term low dosage of PTS seems to be a public health concern. Now imagine if you keep on exposing to certain toxic chemicals, although low dosage, but but after 40, 50, 70 years later, it might develop into cancer or develop into tissue damage kind of disease. So a holistic and multidisciplinary approach should be used to demonstrate potential health effects and economic loss. So when the policymakers, when they hear about, oh, there are problems on our residents about their health effects and also economic loss, they will then listen. I think we need to understand a bit more on the geochemical cycles of these food contaminants. Where do they come from? Where do they go? Will they enter into our food production system? And so we should have more stringent control and management of toxic chemicals. And we should focus on the PTS, which are common in our region for better control. And then finally, scientific input is needed for sustainable environmental management. I think this is the end of my talk. Back to you, Dr. Yu. Hello.
Thank you, Professor Wang.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. So we have learned a lot from your talk.
Thank you.
And Professor Wang's talk introduced many different case studies regarding not only heavy metals, also many organic pollutants like pH, PCBs, PBDs, and so on. So he linked the pollutants with the human health. So that's very important because the list of the PTS is become long and long. So in the passing decades. So are there any questions from our audience? So we have several platforms for this talk. So in Zoom, now we have 25 audience, and in Bilibili, I will have a look. There are more than 300 persons, and in the another platform co-share, we have another. We have 900 persons. So
wow.
Yes,
Wow,
many audience. So
Okay.
are there any questions? You can just raise your hand by clicking the hand button below the Zoom app, or you can leave messages in the chat room in your platform like Bilibili and Co-share. So we will transfer your question to Professor Wang.
I have a look at the written messages. I think
Yes.
3 of them from the same person, from Professor Chan, Dr. Chan or Professor Chan. And thank you for his messages. He reminds me of the term heavy metals, and more recently, another term, potentially toxic elements, would be preferred. Yeah, thank you very much for pointing this out. I will change to use this new term later on. Thank you very much. 3 messages from same person.
Yes, yes. Okay, Professor Wang, I have questions actually. So
Yes.
as you know, you have I remember when I do my PhD study under your supervision, and we have a project about e-waste, and also we have another project from UNEP related to PTS pollutants, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so
yes.
So we have many different kinds of pollutants, not only including the heavy metals and the poppers and or PTS. So in your opinion, which or what kind of pollutants is the main issue of the when we do the regulation? So this is a question. So because as you know, we have many new pollutants like the emerging pollutants. So from the older pollutants to the new emerging pollutants. So what's happening to?
Okay, this is a good question, Dr. Yu. Good question.
Yeah.
Now, if you remember, the Stockholm Convention came out 2002, I think. So originally there were 12 POPs were under control. 12 POPs, mainly chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides. DDT is a typical example, and others would be Mirex and so on. And then 2 in industrial chemicals. I think it was 9 pesticides, 2 industrial chemicals, including PCB and hexachlorohexane, and also 2 industrial byproducts, dioxin and furans. We do not produce them intentionally, so we call them unintended byproducts. We don't want to produce them that much because when we burn something, especially waste materials which contain plastics, we will generate high concentration of dioxin. So we were looking at those 12 toxic chemicals at that time. And then eventually we added a few afterwards, because the beauty about this Stockholm Convention, you can keep on adding toxic chemicals under control if you find out if these toxic chemicals would fulfill three major criteria. Number one, they are very toxic. They cause problems, cancer, and so on, toxic to human and ecological health. And also they travel long distance. We call them grasshopping effects, going to a remote area. So eventually PBDE is a good example under control. Now, I didn't have time. Well, you mentioned e-waste. E-waste would be a separate topic. Now, e-waste is a bit different. Now, e-waste, China imposed very tight control on the e-waste entering into the country. So now the e-waste seems to divert it into other countries, and then they also stored in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is a free port. So all these shipments of e-waste coming to China and used to be smuggled through the borders to Guiyu and Taizhou and these places. But now you cannot find any way to go inside the China. So for e-waste, we have some regulations. I think the Basel Convention we talked about, and also Rotterdam Convention, they try to stop the movement, transboundary movement of these potential toxic waste materials. I think there seems to be loopholes for this convention. I think we need international collaboration in order to stop these toxic chemicals moving from one country to other countries. And mercury, it came out, the convention, Minamata Convention. I went there once, Minamata Bay, where it was started about 60, 70 years ago. It's some kind of toxic chemicals in our food because of all these people, fishermen in the bay, eating all this seafood contain high concentration of mercury, in particular methyl mercury. So the Minamata Convention came out about eight years ago, not that long. So eventually, well, hopefully, I think all these toxic chemicals will be under control. But then when I show you the horrifying trend of these toxic chemicals, we tend to produce a lot of these chemicals. Human beings are so clever. They keep on inventing new chemicals. But the thing is, not all the chemicals have been fully investigated, whether they have toxic effects on the environment and on human beings, and then they are in the market. So we are facing a continuous problem. I'm sorry to say.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Wang. So my another question is about the food safety. So you do a lot of studies regarding the food safety, right? So like the fish, the rice, and so are there any advice from you to our food dietary?
Yes, I'm still very interested. More recently, I tend to write more reviews. As you know, I'm not able to supervise any more PhD students. So sometimes I have some junior colleagues, some postdoc fellows in different institutes, and they are interested in writing reviews. So we try to look at the problem, for example, the microplastics in marine environment, whereby the bivalves would take them up very efficiently, affecting the marine environment and so on. So, well, in terms of eating food, I think my golden rule is don't eat the same kind of food every day. I think you change your food item. Sometimes you eat smaller fish, sometimes, and then you try one or two different fish and then meat and other meats and different kinds of vegetables. I think that would be better.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are
there any
good.
question?
We have 5 minutes.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes.
Good timing. Good timing. Oh, I have one more question. Great presentation. Thank you. I fully agree. Regulators would need scientific input from scientists to support decision-making in terms of environmental management. Yes, thank you very much, Professor Chen. He agreed that regulators would need scientific input from scientists to support decision-making in terms of environmental management. Thank you very much for your comment, Professor Chen. Good.
Okay, Professor Wang, maybe I have another last question about the regulation of the PTS. So
yes.
I noticed that you also did some research related microplastics, right? So
yes, a bit,
for
not that much.
Yeah, for the microplastics, so did you do some research about the microplastics in soil and the plant system? So are there any research about the transfer from the soil to the plant of the?
I think there are a few research groups who are doing this very well, actually. Loyal Ming will be one. Loyal Ming in Nanjing Institute of Soil Science, and also Mo Tafei in Jinan University. I think these two groups, they work on, well, especially Loyal Ming on microplastics, and Mo Tafei mainly on, well, in addition to microplastics, they also work on toxic chemicals, organic chemicals, and so on. I think microplastics, in addition to the size, which they are small, microplastics, very small size, nanoplastics, and so on. I think I would very much like to know more of the potential toxic effects of these chemicals associated with plastics, namely bisphenol A, which is a constituent of plastics, and also the additive phthalates. You add phthalates into plastics so you can mold them easily into different shape, different products. So these two are endocrine disruptors. And also the microplastics, they are accused of transferring other toxic chemicals and even pathogens around because of the large surface of this nano microplastics. So I expect there will be more and more paper coming out. Well, in fact, plastics is a very much a hot topic. My department, there are a few young junior colleagues, well, in terms of age, they're doing very well. So I took part in a few projects working with them together, including one supported by the Drainage Services Department, and try to look at the fates of these plastics fragmented into microplastics and so on, going through the sewage treatment systems and try to find out whether there are ways to stop these microplastics emitting to the coastal environment because of sewage discharge. I think you will see more and more papers on plastics globally in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Wang. So
thank you.
Thank you. Excellent talk. So now I think it's time to finish this talk.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang. I hope we can meet in Nanjing or in other city in China.
Soon.
In the future.
Next year, I hope. Good.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you very much for the organizers and all the audience. Thank you very much and bye.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Professor Wang. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.